I'll sort of talk about where I am coming from, right? Though Anurag, you and I have talked before about Paul Bloom's perspectives on limitations of empathy and all that, but at the same time, it's a little tricky, right? In the society, we generally feel that there is overly a lack of empathy itself, and at the same time, in smaller circles, we are also talking about the limitations of empathy, given the kind of work that we do, go interact with so many kinds of users in different geographies and different contexts, different social problems, right? And we have a slightly sort of a little more nuanced experiences with empathy and trying to practice it in ourselves and in at workplace. But something that keeps coming back to me is, let's take a very basic example. I've been talking to a lot of students in the past few years, right? And I've been mentoring a bunch of students in the past few months, later part of this since this year, right? And just yesterday I was talking to a cohort in US, where I was talking about habits and all. Even though the number was 30, and I was going about talking things about habits and how they are formed and what are the goods and bads and mechanisms and drawbacks of habits and all that. And I like interactive sessions, right? I was thinking that I can talk in a certain flow in a certain way very confidently because I have done this before, right? I have spoken to people about these behavioral sciences concepts. Now we also know that different people think in a different way, process things in a different way, and people might have different questions, right? And if you start sort of empathizing with every question that you're getting in the chat box, and in the process, if even people raise their hands up and ask, if you try to sort of answer every question empathetically, you will probably sort of lose out on your flow, and then on the aggregate, people not might not actually get the best experience out of it, right? And yeah, expanding it to say how an organization is run or even a state is run, recently we talked about how an aggregate hates the individual, right? So, sort of related to that also here, drawing some points that if I start empathizing with each and every one and their idiosyncrasies, then I will lose out on the core message of what I'm talking about, right? And I think there are trade-offs also. In some cases, these are my hypotheses, right? Many folks speak very loudly and very confidently, and in a very fast-paced manner, and respond very quickly and rationalize and give responses very quickly to questions, right? And they might not always be empathetic. It's what they confidently think is the right thing to say, and might be the answers for the question, genuine question that is coming from the audiences, right? But that might not be the case. I mean, I've always felt that, whatever question anyone asks in the audience, sometimes these experts who are standing in the podium always have the answer ready, right? And it looks like they're answering the audience's question as genuinely as possible, but it's just what they want to say. It's not the right answer for what the audience has asked for, right? Because they've done this so many times, they can come across as sounding very rational and very intelligent, but not, right? Now again, trying to empathize on the expert side or the speaker side, right? I cannot always try to imagine, hey, in the 30 students that I'm talking about, there might be 10 kinds of personalities and 100 ways of thinking about what I'm talking about, right? Then that means I'm going down the rabbit hole, right? In If I try to empathize with each and every one, their background, their questions, their creative inclinations, then I'm probably going to lose out, right? And also on the other side, if I keep talking about only what I believe in, what I confidently think is the right way of looking at things, beliefs, and all, even though I might sound like I question myself and all that, right? That spraying of all the vulnerability and self doubt and all that happens a lot in expert talk. I it I might be losing out in terms of good questions, right? Which might come our way, which through which we might all learn a lot. uh, Basically, I've gone long on this, but I hope this is clear that there's some kind of conundrum and dilemma as to what that boundary of empathy is, right? That how much are you able to empathize? And we know that we cannot empathize with too many people, right? At any point of time, we are only able to empathize with the people next to us or the people who we've always been in touch with, because we can understand that thought process better. we understand where they come from. But if you are exposed to new audience and then you're trying to do as much justice as possible to sharing a particular knowledge, then you either rely on just what you know, or you try to sort of have very interactive session and ask people to ask you questions, right? And then you take it from there. But at the same time, you cannot go into rabbit holes and interesting questions and backgrounds of people, because that would mean that you're trading off with the aggregate understanding, right? Aggregate experience of the audience itself. So I was wondering if you guys have had any experience of being on either side of it, being from the listener side or from the side of sharing knowledge, where you have felt a little vulnerability that I am confident, but there are these needs of users which I might not be doing justice to, right? So I'm gonna stop there.
I think, Jafar, when we are speaking, I'm just going with your example here, speaker and listener. So if I am on a podium and I'm speaking, and if the questions seem irrelevant or not so much associated, just because the audience is asking a question, you have to answer it. That's not the point. You are the speaker, you know what you are supposed to speak about, and you are on a track. So as you said, if you go with too many listeners, too many questions, you'll go down a rabbit hole, and the obviously the talk is going to become unfocused. I mean, it's not even a word, but I'm still using it. It's not going to be focused on what you were actually about to be saying. So as a speaker, you have to be very very conscious about like being empathetic to the listeners questions or whatever. And same way, as a listener, you have to be very empathetic about what are you what stage you are listening to, or what topic you are listening to. And even when you're asking a question, is it relevant or not? I mean, that's what I can say.
I agree, Archana. But sometimes, I've had this habit of, I've always told people, I think you might also share this, that we go by this mental model of no question is a bad question, right? Because there might be other people in the audiences who are hesitating to ask that question or are about to think about that question, right? And hence, even a badly framed question or a too simple of a question can help, uh, inform people a lot, course correct what people are thinking about a certain topic. So in that sense, that culture has also set in, right? That you can ask any question you like, and in that flow, people even end up asking things which they can actually quickly very google it up using their phone, right? I do that a lot. I mean, from the user side, listener side, I always try to find out if that information is available outside, right? So that I can save the time of the presenter and everyone else also, right? It's possible that 7 out of 10 people around me already know that basic concept. So hence, I'm going to cover that up. But in many new situations, new environments, you can't always have like keep guessing what might be the knowledge set of the audience sitting in front of me, right? Unless someone who's invited me has already given me a fair idea of it. But there are also, I think, these trade-offs also where if you become too sensitive to these kind of mental models, and then like you said, that whole objective of that talk or presentation becomes compromised.
I have been a teacher half my life. I can say one thing from my experience, my limited experience. If a student wants to test you by Googling questions, and let us say, like, you don't know the answer, just say you don't know the answer. And if it is very irrelevant, I mean, as a speaker, you should be able to say that the topic is, whatever you are asking is out of scope of this. As a presenter, I usually put limits on. I put a range, like, some questions are out of bound, because if I'm talking about a certain subject to a certain population or certain section of people, I'd at least expect the people to know a basic of that, or at a upper side I can never limit. That is the problem with when we are presenting. If you are not sure about an answer, just say you do not know and you would have to look into it. And uh, I think if we are going out of the way to just say that, or express that we know, or we are kind of trying to find the answer or something, it just
Yeah.
looks bad as a speaker.
Yeah, I get that, Archana. I was talking about, trying to answer very basic questions, right? So, for example, we're talking now about empathy, and then someone in the audience doesn't know what exactly empathy means, right? So, then we spend 2 minutes or 4 minutes on basics of empathy itself. That means that I am trading off with the evolved discussion of what the boundaries of empathies are, right? So many times in the audience, people ask very Googleable questions, right, which they can instantly get answers for, but they will raise their hand and ask a question, and the speaker cannot say that, hey, you can just Google it, right? I mean, I think in many cases they should
Yeah.
be able to, right? They should, right? Hey, okay, you can spend like a few seconds on Google and get that knowledge. We'll move on. If you have more questions beyond that, get back to me, right?
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know what.
why I said, like, as a presenter, what I usually do is, I put a baseline that when you are coming here to like discuss about, let's say, your topic only, how do you define boundaries of empathy? So I expect that, you have a basic knowledge what empathy is. That's it. So I'll start with the understanding that you know what empathy is, because everything above empathy is being discussed in this. If somebody starts asking very, like, basic questions, then the whole goal of, finding the bigger picture is gone. Then you'd be like, you'll end up, discussing only those smaller things, which was probably not even part of your actual class. I mean, I'd say as a class, because I end up teaching, so that's what
Sure,
it is.
sure, sure. I mean, in this context, at least it's a little easier in that way, Archana. There's less heterogeneity. But sometimes when we're talking about behavioral sciences, right, in the other circles that I talk about, we go from A to Z, bring up so many topics and terms and frameworks, right? I'm pretty sure that many folks are lost most of the times. And I think that is a little unfair, right? I can't quickly in the 20 minutes of Mensa session also keep handling Google and look up multiple definitions and resources. But at the same time, if you give a definition for everything, but I guess it's also now that storytelling aspect, right? How can you communicate as intuitively as possible? That requires least number of googlings, and you're also getting the message out of it, right? But Anurag, Sanika, any thoughts and comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly jump in and say a part of empathy also involves knowing your audience itself, right? If you know that you're going to experience a very diverse audience, you'd probably put in a little bit of an introduction into your speech or into whatever it is that you're going to present. But if you know that you're going to address university students who are studying behavioral science, you wouldn't have to explain behavioral science to them. Like, you wouldn't have to start from grassroots, you wouldn't have to start from your heuristics and biases. You just jump in with, here's the concept we're talking about today, let's discuss, right? So I think that a major part of empathy comes with knowing the person who's listening as well, and that's very essential to consider when planning what you're going to talk about in.
Just that it becomes a little more difficult or very difficult on platforms like, say, Clubhouse or Mensa, where strangers are coming in as listeners into your sessions, right? Anurag, you must have thought about it, right? Any comments?
So I clearly can't empathize with your situation, right? Because neither have I been on stage or nor have I've been asked a question, right? But I can totally concur with your thought, right? That in leadership positions, I think empathy starts to get very costly, right? Because empathizing with one person comes at the cost of the group's welfare, right? In some ways or the other, right? So difficult choice, right? I mean, you're standing on a stage and somebody is asking you a question, right? And it's a very difficult choice to make in that moment where we have some kind of a bounded rationality environment, right? You have some level of stress. You are cognitively busy with what you have to say, and then somebody asks a question to kind of really rationally think through all of these things and have a response, right? It's difficult, right? And even if like you said, right, can you Google this, right? I mean, I can willy-nilly assure you that you're shutting the door for even good questions after that, right? Because most people won't risk it, right? Ki matlab, who knows that you might find the second question also very Googleable, right? In that sense. So I think that's where Archana's, strategy works. I think, in these kind of situations, there is all-round uncertainty, right? And everybody is looking for a format, right? So if you are comfortable with one style versus the other, right, I think by being on the stage, you have earned that right to establish that format, right? And if you personally are uncomfortable with the idea that you have something interesting to say and you don't want to be lost in questions that are Googleable, right? I mean, if I were you, and I hope I am you at some point where I get the chance to speak on a stage, you would rather establish the norm and say, guys, I'm going to talk for 15 minutes and then we'll take questions at the end of it, right? If that's the way you wanted that conversation to go, right? And then within a conversation, I'm not sure, right? You having given people the right to ask a question, right? You can't be the judge now of what is a good question, right? I think that's fairly, uncharitable to the audience, right? That's your audience, like Sanika said, right? And you deal with it, right? I mean, if you are seated in a noble committee, people won't ask you Googleable questions, right? But if you're sitting in a student community, why would you not expect Googleable questions, right? I mean, I hope I'm not sounding rude. I'm trying to empathize, right? I mean,
No, yes,
you
yes.
can see.
That is the part of the problem that I'm trying to
I'd,
unpack. That there's so
I'd like to add one thing. So, Jafar, what you are saying about, a lot of people in a platform and then they start from scratch. So, I'll tell you from my experience as an optometrist. So, when we examine eyes and when we are looking at different parts of the eyes, we are checking vision. People have already Googled all the stuff when they come to see us, and before we can even come on a diagnosis, they have like 1,000 googleable answers in their head. So when I was sitting at that point in a chair, when I would examine somebody's eyes and say, you have myopia, or you have this kind of a eye problem, or you have that kind of a eye problem, you won't believe that the person would actually Google in front of me and then tell me that, these are the possible answers, or these are the possible treatments, and what are you going to do about it, or what are you not going to do about it. The problem is they do not know the subject. We know the subject. Now when they start doing that, it's just that, then the empathy kind of goes somewhere else, and then you go very rational, that, if you are googling and you are answer like asking me such questions, then I'll also ask you questions as an expert, and let's see that if you can answer those or not. And then your expertise comes into play of, uh, passing your message politely to that particular person.
I want to meet you, Archana, someday with an eye problem.
Please do. I will be able to help you out for sure.
This is interesting. Glad you brought this up, Archana. And I feel like I have been on both sides of that, right? Where I have gone to doctors or experts with
Yes.
a lot of Googled questions and then on the spot
I
re-questioning.
used to, I used to tell patients, if you Google anything about diseases, you'll end up dead. Because anything about disease, if you Google, then everything ends up in death. Either it's a cancer, or it's a melanoma, or it's something. But it is going to end up in death. So I said, if you want to live, please listen to me. That's it.
Finding time for extra or
These are the ones that you should Mentza, Jafar. Will help you in your next conversation.
Yeah, because when I just started as an optometrist, that's when Google came up, and it was like our biggest enemy, because everyone would Google everything and they'd come to the store, like come to us after like trying everything.
So,
So it
by
was,
the way, Archana, when we are doing some work in EdTech also, right, the teachers are saying the same thing. कि बच्चे क्लास में आके ऐसे क्वेश्चन पूछते हैं ना that you know that this guy has Googled and figured out the right question to embarrass you, right? And like, मतलब ऐसा question पूछेंगे as teachers, right? So,
Yeah.
I personally, right, I generally appreciate that. And to Archana, to your example, right, I think there is one more space of inquiry into what might be the boundary of empathy, right? Say, for example, I personally, if I was in the doctor's position, I feel like I need one more level of empathy where I have empathized with the user, that user, the patient, is going through anxiety and a lot of stress and all. And that's why this person is trying to find answers all over. And hence, I need to tell him a story that calms him down while rationalizes this fact that there's misinformation online, and also there's a structured way of looking at diagnosis, right? So that empathy also solves many things. I think that requires one more level of empathy because that patient is troubling you, right? And then you need that empathy bandwidth, given you also sort of looked at 100 patients today. So that's where it's another case where we could define that boundaries of empathy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because after you see a patient's dire situation and all that, then you don't have a choice. As an examiner, you don't have a choice. You are empathetic to them because you know what is coming in the future, and then you have to tell them nicely, politely, or whatever. You have to sugarcoat so many things and just tell them. And sometimes if they just look, they're still finding answers, we just leave that to the patient only. We don't even want to fight with them about it, because if something's keeping them in the good place, then let it be. Sometimes you just have to lose that whole fight, because there's no point. If that fellow is going to be unhappy when he's walking out of your clinic, then why just make him unhappy?
Also, sometimes starts affecting your own sanity. That's also one more
Yeah,
reason.
that's how I left hospital. I started teaching because at one point I was actually feeling that I have lost the empathy towards the patients, because everything seemed so normal. So patients would come with the problem. I already know the answer, so I would not appear as empathetic as I'm supposed to be, and then patients would feel a bit distressed that the doctor doesn't seem very serious. So those are also issues.
It'd be interesting to get counseling psychologists in here to talk about how they handle with this. And Sanika, I saw you unmuting. Did you have something to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because so I studied elocution as a child. So I did all the Trinity exams and all of that fun stuff when it comes to speaking in public, right? And the one thing that I noticed, which brought me back to your introduction about this topic in the first place, was that we were always taught that a good conversation when you're having with a bunch of people, when you're speaking